On the evening of the 9th of May, 1943, the pilots watching the radar screens at a Royal Air Force station near Aberdeen saw something that made no sense at all. A German aircraft, a Junkers 88, one of the most dangerous machines the Luftwaffe flew, was coming in low over the Scottish coast from the direction of Norway. That alone was not strange. German aircraft came to Scotland often enough to bomb, to photograph, to die. What was strange was what this one did. It did not turn for a target. It did not climb to attack. It lowered its landing gear, fired off colored signal flares like a friend asking permission to come home, and waggled its wings, the universal sign a pilot makes when he wants you to know he means no harm. And then it simply landed on a British airfield in the middle of a war and rolled to a stop. For a moment, nobody moved. The men on the ground were looking at an intact, fully equipped German night fighter sitting on their runway, its engines ticking as they cooled, its crew making no attempt to run or to fight. What they did not yet understand, what it would take their best scientific minds weeks to fully grasp, was that bolted into the nose of that aircraft was a secret the British had been chasing for nearly 2 years. A secret that was, at that moment, costing them hundreds of young men a month in the night skies over Germany. The thing they wanted more than almost anything else in the war had just landed itself in one piece and switched off its engines. Here is what this video is going to untangle. Because the obvious explanation that 3 German airmen simply changed sides and handed Britain a war-winning prize is only one possibility, and possibly not even the true one. From the moment that aircraft touched down, there were people who believed the whole thing was too neat, too convenient, too perfectly timed to be the accident or the desertion it appeared to be. Was this a genuine defection by men who had turned against Hitler? Was it something darker, a long-running intelligence operation that the British could never afford to admit? Or was it, as the simplest accounts insist, 3 frightened men taking a desperate gamble with their own lives? By the end, you will see why historians still cannot fully agree, and why the British had every reason to keep the answer buried. But first you have to understand why a single German radar set was worth more to Britain in the spring of 1943 than almost any other object on Earth. To see that, you have to go up into the darkness over Germany, where young men were dying in numbers that are hard to imagine. To understand why 3 men would gamble their lives to deliver it, you have to understand what that radar was doing to Britain's sons in the dark. By 1943, Britain was bombing Germany by night. Going in daylight meant being seen and slaughtered, so Bomber Command went in the dark instead. Hundreds of aircraft at a time, crewed by young men, most of them not yet 25, flying for hours over hostile territory towards cities ringed with guns. For a while, the darkness protected them. But the Germans had been building something in the night, a defensive system of terrifying efficiency, and at the heart of it was a technology the British could sense was there, but could not see. German night fighters were finding British bombers in total darkness, climbing up beneath them and destroying them with a precision that should not have been possible in a black sky. The losses mounted and then mounted again, until on some raids the number of bombers that did not come home reached levels that simply could not be sustained. Whole crews vanished into the dark, and the men who planned the raids knew with cold certainty that the Germans had found some way of seeing in the night that their own men could not match. They knew it was a form of radar, small enough to fit inside a fighter. What they did not have was one they could hold in their hands, take apart, and learn to defeat. And until they had that, every single night more young men would die without ever knowing what had found them. The device had a name the British would come to know well.
It was called Liechtenstein, an airborne radar small enough to be carried in the nose of a night fighter, its antennae bristling out the front like the antlers of some metal insect. With it, a German crew no longer had to hunt by eye through the blackness. The radar found the bomber for them, fed them the range and the bearing, and guided them up into the killing position beneath it, where the bomber crew, staring out into nothing, never saw what was coming. To beat it, the British first had to understand it exactly, and you cannot jam with any confidence a machine you have never examined. They had pieced together fragments, guesses, scraps from crashed aircraft, too smashed to be useful. What they needed was a complete, working set, switched on and intact, with the documents to explain it. It was, in the spring of 1943, perhaps the single most wanted piece of enemy technology in the entire war, and the chances of ever getting one, gift-wrapped and undamaged, were almost nil. A shot-down night fighter was a wreck. A captured one would have its secrets destroyed by its own crew before they surrendered, which is exactly why what happened at Aberdeen was so extraordinary, and why some people found it impossible to believe it had happened by chance.
The aircraft that landed was a Junkers 88, and it carried the very thing the British had been dreaming of, a complete and working example of the German night fighter radar, the first one ever to fall into Allied hands in one piece. The 3 men aboard had taken off from occupied Norway. The pilot was an Oberleutnant named Herbert Schmidt. With him were his wireless operator, Paul Rosenberger, and his flight engineer, Erich Cantwell. Their stated mission was an ordinary patrol over the sea. Instead, Rosenberger is said to have sent a false message back to their own headquarters, reporting that one of the engines was on fire, an emergency that would explain the aircraft dropping off the radar and giving the crew the cover they needed to vanish. Then they turned, not back toward Norway, but west, across the North Sea, toward Britain, and toward a future none of them could be sure of. There is one detail that complicates even this moment, and it is worth pausing on. By several accounts, Cantwell, the flight engineer, was not part of the plan at all, and only realized what was happening when it was far too late to stop it. If that is true, then not even everyone aboard the aircraft had chosen to be there. Think about the nerve the whole thing took, whatever the reason behind it. They were flying one of the most recognizable enemy aircraft in the sky, directly toward a country whose entire air defense existed to shoot down exactly that aircraft. They had every reason to expect they would be intercepted and blown out of the air by British fighters long before they ever saw a runway. They flew on anyway. And the most remarkable part is that they very nearly were shot down by the people they were trying to reach. As the Junkers crossed the Scottish coast, British Spitfires were sent up to intercept it, and for a few minutes the whole gamble hung by a thread. The German crew did everything they could to signal surrender, the landing gear down, the flares, the desperate waggling of the wings. And the British pilots, to their lasting credit, understood. They did not open fire. Instead, in one of the strangest scenes of the entire air war, British Spitfires formed up around the German night fighter and escorted it gently down to the airfield at Dice, near Aberdeen, shepherding their deadliest enemy home as carefully as if it were one of their own. The aircraft landed, the crew climbed out, and the British slowly began to understand the magnitude of what had just dropped into their laps. There is a detail here that tells you everything about the value of the prize. So precious was that aircraft that days later, when it was flown south to be examined by Britain's top scientists, it was sent under the escort of British fighters the entire way, not to stop it escaping, but to make absolutely certain that no trigger-happy British pilot or anti-aircraft gunner shot down the most valuable aircraft in the country before the experts could get their hands on it. Now we come to the question that has never fully been answered, and the reason this story is stranger than a simple tale of brave defectors.
Almost from the moment the engines stopped, there were those who looked at the whole affair and felt it was too perfect. Consider the coincidences. The British wanted this exact piece of equipment more than almost anything else in the war. And here it was, delivered to a Scottish airfield, switched on, undamaged, complete, by a crew who slipped away from their own side with a conveniently timed report of engine trouble, and who were met not by a storm of gunfire, but by an escort. Years after the war, claims surfaced in the German press that Schmidt had in fact been working for British intelligence for years, that this was no spur-of-the-moment desertion, but the final act of a long and carefully managed operation. Other accounts insist there was nothing secret about it at all, that these were simply men who had come to hate the regime they served and seized their one chance to escape it, and that the neatness was luck and nothing more. Here is the honest position, and it is worth being clear rather than pretending to a certainty no one really has. There is no solid public proof that this was an intelligence operation, but there is also no way to rule it out, and the British, who ran deception schemes of breathtaking cunning throughout the war, had every reason never to confirm such a thing, even if it were true. An intelligence service that admits how it really obtained its prizes is one that loses them. So the mystery sits there still, the brave defectors and the secret agent occupying the same set of facts, and the truth kept deliberately in shadow.
But set the mystery aside for a moment, because however that aircraft came to Britain, what the British did with it once they had it is not in doubt at all, and it changed the war in the night. The radar was taken apart by some of the finest scientific minds in the country, men who had spent years trying to understand this exact machine from fragments and guesswork. Now they had the whole thing working in front of them. They learned exactly how far it could see in the dark and how narrow the slice of sky was that it watched. And most important of all, they learned where it saw nothing at all, the gaps and the blind spots where a bomber could hide in plain sight. And the moment they knew where it was blind, they could beat it. What followed was quiet, technical, and devastating. The British learned to blind the radar with thin metal foil cut to exactly the right length so that a single bomber bloomed into 1,000 ghosts on the German operator's screen, and he could no longer tell which Echo was a real aircraft and which was a scrap of falling tin. A weapon that had hunted with perfect certainty was suddenly drowning in phantoms. Then came the cruelest reversal of all. British night fighters were fitted with a device that could listen for the German radar's own signal and follow it home, which meant the hunter in the dark had become the hunted. A German crew switching on their radar to search for a bomber were now, without knowing it, lighting a beacon that guided a British fighter straight to them through the blackness. The very thing that made them deadly had become the thing that got them killed. And from that captured Junkers came one more answer, worked out by studying the one place the German fighter could not see, the patch of sky directly beneath and behind it, where its radar was blind. Bomber crews were taught to throw their heavy aircraft into a violent, plunging corkscrew the instant they suspected they had been found, a maneuver designed to hurl them down into exactly that blind patch and break the radar's grip before the killing burst could come. It was tested using that very aircraft, the gift from Aberdeen, now teaching the men it had been built to destroy exactly how to survive it. None of this made the night sky safe. Nothing could do that. Men kept dying over Germany until the very end of the war, and the Germans, as resourceful as their enemies, kept building newer radars to replace the one that had been compromised, so the whole deadly contest simply moved up to the next frequency and began again. But for a window of crucial weeks and months, the secret that had landed itself at Aberdeen gave Britain the edge it had been desperate for. And it is worth stopping to picture what that edge actually meant, because it was not measured in machines, it was measured in young men. Somewhere over Germany on a dark night in 1943, there was a bomber crew, 7 men in a freezing fuselage who would have been found and killed without ever seeing their attacker, the way thousands before them had been. Instead, because of what had been learned from that one captured aircraft, the radar that should have located them was drowning in false echoes, or the fighter creeping up beneath them was thrown off, or they threw their aircraft into that violent corkscrew at the right moment and the lock was broken. And they lived. They flew home, landed, slept, and most of them never knew how close they had come, or that the reason they grew old was a German aircraft that had quietly parked itself on a Scottish runway. You cannot put an exact number on those men, but it is certainly not small. A machine built to kill them in the dark had, by landing on a British runway, turned into a machine that helped keep them alive. So what did those German pilots really do when they landed in Scotland? On the surface, the answer is simple. They handed Britain the most wanted secret of the air war intact and saved an unknowable number of lives in the doing. But underneath that, the real answer is one we may never fully have. We do not know with certainty whether we are looking at 3 brave men who turned against a monstrous regime, or at the closing move of an intelligence operation so secret that its records were never meant to be read, or simply at 3 frightened airmen who got astonishingly lucky on the worst night of their lives. The aircraft itself survived the war and survives to this day, sitting quietly in a museum, its strange antlered radar still bolted to its nose. People walk past it, mostly without a second glance, with no idea that they are looking at one of the most valuable objects of the entire war, and at a mystery that has never been solved. It gave up its secret the moment it landed. The men who flew it never fully gave up theirs.